Today on Between the Lines, the true story about late-night television and the man who invented it all, Steve Allen. I'm Barry Kibrick. Author Ben Alba and Steve Allen's wife, Jayne Meadows, share with us the legacy of Steve Allen, the creative force behind late-night television as we know it today.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the purpose.
Steve Allen was one of the most innovative forces behind the golden era of television. The late-night template that he created survives to this day under the names of Letterman, Conan, and Leno. With his book Inventing Late Night, Ben Alba, along with Steve's widow Jayne Meadows, lets us know that Steverino was more than just a groundbreaking pioneer in television, but a man driven by a social conscience that has left his mark not only in the world of late-night TV, but on all the fans and people that he touched through the small screen. Jayne, a pleasure. Thank you so much. You know, you've graced our set once before, and I am so honored that you are back here with us. And Ben, a pleasure meeting you.
Great to be here.
I'm going to begin right off the way Jay Leno began, and that is simply this. It all started with him. That's what this book is about, inventing late night. What we don't realize is one man invented late night that was then followed almost verbatim by everyone, whether it's Conan, whether it's Letterman, whether it's Carson, whether it's Kimmel, you name it. This is the pattern that they followed.
It all seems so simple. You have the opening monologue and you have the desk. Who would ever think of having a desk in some place other than an office? But you have a desk in the middle of the stage. You have the host bantering with a band leader, kind of loose and zany, going up into the audience and talking to people in the audience and having fun with them, taking the cameras out into the street, down the hall, doing comedy sketches and doing wild stunts. All those elements started with Steve Allen through a series of different sort of experiments that he conducted while he was in radio and in early television. So you wind up with, I think the beauty of it is that all of these elements still last through the present day, through all of these hosts that you've mentioned.
Well, you know, you say silly, but there was always a very seriously level of sophistication in what Steve did, whether it was with jazz music and a whole bunch of other elements that he brought to it. So there was a silliness, but there was a sophistication. And Jayne, in the book, it's even, Ben mentions that you were asked, they wanted to, you know, really see if they can put this from a local show in New York to around the country. And everyone there said, no way, no one's going to get this sophisticated humor. But Jayne, you said right off the bat, this was going to be a groundbreaking, successful show.
Yes, but I have to confess, Barry, that I actually said the words to Louis Nye. And it was on the Friday night when it was the Steve Allen show. And the show was over with. Who's the vibe player that was lovely man? Anyway, he had been the guest star. And he was putting away the vibes. And Louis and I were seated in the audience.
Lionel Hampton, I bet you.
Lionel Hampton,
okay.
Exactly. And Louis said, oh, Jayne, we shouldn't do this. They're not going to understand us in the South and the Midwest and blah, blah. I said, Louis, Monday's my birthday, darling. And Monday, it will be the Tonight Show. And that's a good omen. It's my birthday. This show will run forever. I didn't really know that it would. I mean, who would know? But I don't think I really thought it would. It's just I wanted to cheer up my friend. He was,
the truth comes out. It's not in the book that way.
Absolutely. And I told Ben, and it's the first time this is ever, you know that I've never told anybody this.
Right.
Louis bought it. He thought I really meant it. I was just as nervous as everybody else, you know, that they wouldn't get it.
Well, you know what they did get, though, and this is something, when I was just breaking into television. Maybe this is even a fellow you might know, Jayne, because he ended up producing the Andy Williams show and directing the Flip Wilson show and
Bob Henry?
Pierre?
Bob Henry.
Oh, Bob Henry.
One of the
Oh,
great.
I love him.
He is just one of the most dear people in my life. And I'll never forget, I was about to leave the business, and Bob came up to me, and he said, "Don't. You've got to stay." And I said, "Really?" He said, "I don't know why." He goes, "The only thing that's important is if you're likable." And Steve Allen, in the book, over and over again, the one quality that he had was his likability. People liked him, they trusted him, and as he said, that meant that if the humor bombed, it wasn't an issue because they liked him.
That's what one of his writers said, Stan Burns, and he said that Steve may have been very, very bright, and you have a lot of people on television that are bright and articulate and maybe intellectual. Steve had all those qualities, but you have to add the likability to it, because if they, and I think as Stan says in the book, when I interviewed him about 6 years ago, if they like you before you even come out on the stage, then you're going to be a hit.
Yep.
And Steve even recognized that early in his television career and made sure, and I don't think he even really had to make sure, because that was just a part of his personality, that he was so affable and liked the people that were in the audience, wanted to entertain them, wanted to please them. And as a result, I think that's what really made him such a hit, because people liked him already.
He was every man, but he wasn't every man. You see, he was unbelievably talented. He could write, he could compose, he could play the piano, but he had the quality because he came from a very, very simple, poverty-stricken background, you know.
Well, you know, it's funny. You began to say how talented he is. In the book, Ben, you even mentioned, and I don't remember if it was you or one of the people you spoke to, that because Steve was so talented in so many areas, that he may have not even though he was so famous and got so much credit for so many things, he may have still gotten a little less because he had such vast talents.
Steve
He was a
Lawrence
great
said that.
songwriter. He was a great composer. He was great in many different things. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that occurs because of that.
Steve Lawrence says that a lot of people can't relate to that. Somebody that is so facile in many different aspects. And I think that might have been perhaps the curse of being a Renaissance man, because you go from one project to another and one kind of discipline into another, and people may not remember you for just one thing because you're doing so many. And I think that in some ways may dilute the appreciation that the public might have for you had you only stuck to doing one thing.
Now, Steve, though, besides just being talented, there's another element in here that I think goes unnoticed by many people, and that was the social conscience that he had. Steve Allen, and it's very funny, and I want to discuss this latter part later about Elvis, but and you'll see how it ties in. But the first person to literally have African American talent on his show, not only have them on his show as talent, but sit them down at the table and sit there and discuss things with them. Nobody was doing that. First person to have people like Elvis on TV, even though I know Ed Sullivan gets all the credit. We don't know why. That's what I want to talk to you about later. But Elvis, Lenny Bruce, Jack Kerouac, people that would not be touched at that time by the networks, dealing with issues. I'll never forget the thing with Steve and Edie. The network, think how far we came, didn't want them on. They were too Jewish. And he would fight them on that. He fought constantly for the people that he knew needed to be available as talent.
Well, because he judged them by talent. And they were close friends, many of them. Sammy Davis was one of our best friends. Steve, he wouldn't take any guff from anybody.
He said that he just loved going to work every day. And so many of the people you spoke to in this book loved that experience because of the environment that Steve set up.
And not only that, but when Johnny took over, he hired Skitch, Doc Severinsen, Steve's writers. I can't remember the others, Ben.
Well, Herb Sargent was the chief.
Herb Sargent, you're right. And they did Johnny's first year. And yet he says in there, the happiest I ever had in my life, because they had such freedom, you see. with Steve.
I didn't have to prompt anybody to tell me how happy they were, what the time of their lives was that this was for them. And it really struck me. It was almost like, in some ways, like a sociological kind of study, because how many of us can really truly say that we're having the time of our lives doing what we're doing? And as it turned out, these people, Skitch Henderson for one, I mean, he even said that of all the things that he's done throughout his career, and I interviewed him maybe about 7 years ago, so he had already gone through most of his career then, conducting the NBC Symphony, founding and conducting the New York Pops Orchestra, and conducting for Frank Sinatra, doing all of these wonderful accomplishments. And here we have him saying that of all of these things, the one thing I would like to be remembered for the most is doing The Tonight Show with Steve Allen. Even though at the time that he began working for Steve, it was very awkward for him because his world was the world of classical music. And he had been very busy conducting the NBC Symphony and doing very serious kinds of shows. And here he is kind of dumped into this loose, zany chaos going on there. And at first he felt awkward, and at first he felt he was kind of above all of that, but then he began to realize that if you just open yourself up and if you allow yourself to grow more, that you can actually rise to another level.
Well, Jayne, you bring this out in a story that you tell here, and that is that, and Ben, as you testify here, Steve Allen didn't only do, at one time, his daily show, he would also prep for a weekly show, would possibly be starring in another drama, and doing a film at the same time.
Yeah.
And all of these, just juggling all these balls at
That's
once.
right. The Benny Goodman story. He did the Benny Goodman story, the movie, at Universal, while he was doing an hour show opposite Ed Sullivan. Was he doing the Tonight Show too?
That was the year after.
The year
Yeah,
after.
uh-huh.
But he did the Ed Sullivan show for a while he was doing the Tonight Show.
So that was 8 hours of original entertainment programming each week.
Unbelievable.
Live, you know. So I think for a while, and that was, I think that's something that a lot of people probably aren't aware of, is that when he started the Sunday night primetime show, he had been doing so well ratings-wise in late-night television, because this was really the first really big late-night hit on a network. And so once he proved that late night could be commercially viable, NBC thought that, well, why don't we try putting him opposite Ed Sullivan, who was the ratings king of Sunday nights, who basically swept the floor with all the other networks, and let's see if we can at least, instead of being trounced in the ratings during that Sunday night slot, let's see if we can at least have Steve Allen maybe come up alongside him, maybe give him some real competition. And as it turned out, they wanted Steve to do this hour-long live primetime comedy hour at the same time he was doing 5 nights of The Tonight Show for 90 minutes a night each night. He tried it. He was certainly game enough to try it, and then he thought, well, why don't I cut back to 3 nights of The Tonight Show a week, and then we'll do the primetime show. But that still proved a bit much for him. Although you have to commend him for being so ambitious to try it.
And also, by the way, commend him for who he'd have come in for him. Other very creative people. Ernie Kovacs would sit in there. He was never afraid. His ego did not seem to ever fear other talent. He seemed to really relish it and promote it. And that, and in fact, I said I wanted to bring up that Ed Sullivan thing, because with Elvis, the credit to the world is Ed Sullivan, Elvis on Ed, when it was Steve that had Elvis first, and due to almost his own sensibility for the show and his sensibility for Elvis, knew that it wouldn't be right for him to be signed up to a big long-term deal, and then of course CBS offered Elvis tenfold per episode and had him, but
Steve spotted him first, though.
Steve did spot him first and ended up having him on there first, and yet Elvis gets all the credit for being on Ed.
But Elvis didn't want to go with Sullivan.
I know, but
backstage,
Colonel Parker though said too much money there.
Yeah, and Ed Sullivan during the show. I think that's in the book too.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. I was during Steve's show, Colonel Parker was already on the phone. With Ed's people.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that Elvis said, "No, I don't want to go with him. Please ask Steve if he wants me. I want to stay here."
Yeah, but Steve, though, was honorable. He didn't think having Elvis there was good every night for Elvis or for Steve.
Because this was a primetime comedy variety show, so it wasn't, the nature of the show wasn't that you just go on and do your number and then you're off the stage, but you'd have to come back and do a comedy sketch, which Elvis did. That was probably the only show, according to one of the writers that I interviewed, the only show in which Elvis did a comedy sketch with, this is with Andy Griffith and Imogene Coca and Steve.
Yeah.
Dunn, right?
And he was good.
Yeah, he was very good.
He was good.
And then they and instead of having him sing Hound Dog the way he ordinarily would, they kind of tried to do a little bit of a comedic approach, and they had him sing to a Basset Hound, which was somewhat controversial to rock and roll purists. But then afterwards, when they were discussing whether Elvis should take Ed Sullivan's offer, Steve Allen really proved that he was just as much an artist as Ed Sullivan was a businessman. And Steve said, you know, really, I think that the kind of format that Ed can offer you, where you're really just in your own element and you can control that, you'd probably be more effective there than trying to fit into ours, where we have to kind of make you fit into comedy sketches and maybe do things that aren't quite exactly in your vein. And I think that probably it worked out just as well.
But again, testament to the man, in my opinion. When you read that, he knew what Elvis was going to be. There was no doubt. He could have monopolized that opportunity, and he did not
We had a
choose to do
meeting
it.
of the husbands and wives, and we all sat there whether or not they should sign Elvis. I think Steve's love of Steve and Edie and Andy had something to do with it.
Again, everything's being revealed on the show. It's not in the book.
This is an exclusive.
This
here.
is an
I just
exclusive.
figured it out, though.
Wow.
I never knew it before until you two were talking.
Oh.
After what you've been saying, knowing Steve, he would not have hurt Steve, Edie, or Andy.
Oh, isn't that insight? For the what is it, for the paperback edition?
Right. Yeah, new exclusives there on the back we can put in.
I love that. I love it. You know, and again, I want to keep bringing up some testament to the man himself, and that is, not only did he invent this late night forum, but television itself was still brand new, and Steve sort of had an awareness. Prior to him coming there, all of television really was either a conversion of radio or a conversion of vaudeville. And that's all they were doing in the very beginning. He was the first one to use the medium itself as a form of entertainment, not just a form of presentation.
It's so well put. I wish I wrote that in there.
Again, for the paperback, I'm going to get credit on that paperback, I'm promising.
It's absolutely true, because when you think of Milton, Jack Benny, George Burns, Bob Hope, they took their radio shows as they existed all through the years and put them on TV.
And their radio shows were tightly scripted.
Yeah.
And so Steve even revolutionized radio, because if you had in radio an exchange between Jack Benny and Rochester, where Jack Benny asked Rochester, well, where did I put my comb? And Rochester will say immediately, you know, well, sir, it's in the top drawer right next to your hair, and it's all written out. You know? But Steve changed that, and he was able to introduce ad-libbing and being more spontaneous, and it came through sheer necessity, because he tells a story about how Doris Day had not showed up to a program that he was hosting that had an audience. I think her agent, there was some kind of a mix-up, and she didn't appear, and Steve had already played both sides of her record. And so there they were with about 20 minutes of air to fill on the radio, and that's when he decided that, well, why don't I just go up into the audience and talk to these nice folks that are up there. And he brought, which at the time, these microphones were not lightweight like these RF ones that we've got, but these heavy iron clanky microphone, and he brought that into the audience, started interviewing people, and then that's when he discovered that a nice spontaneous exchange between Steve and somebody in the audience would kill and would generate bigger laughs than if you had had the best scripted line with Milton Berle or Bob Hope. And so that element started to follow him once he discovered, it was kind of an epiphany for him, because up until then, he'd been writing every night to make sure every word was spoken. And the only people that he interviewed were celebrities that were pretty well, would you say they were pretty canned or staged interviews at the time with him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody was selling something. Well, they still are.
Well, that's how we get you here, but hopefully we give them a little bit more than when they get here. But, you know, I want to follow up on that. You said something that I actually can testify to, and it's very rare that I can actually do that. I had the privilege of working in the same studio. I think I told you a little bit before part of this that Steve Allen did The Tonight Show when I was at NBC. And I remember doing something that you talk about in the book, and then I want Jayne to testify to this. We did a weekly show for NBC, and then later on I did a daily show for ABC. And I was looking at this and I was telling people that that weekly show for 1 hour that is so scripted and so intense is much more difficult than the daily show when you are, you know, able to be a bit more impromptu. And Jayne, you've experienced this as you were there. It seems like Steve too. He really felt it was harder for him and the company of people to do that one weekly show than when he was just his natural self
Oh, absolutely.
throughout that daily show, even though it occupied so much more time.
Oh, absolutely. If you can be yourself in front of an audience and can talk without a script, I think audiences like it better. They get to know you. A scripted show is more difficult because you have to learn the lines too. And Steve, oh, how he hated to learn lines.
Oh.
Never, never, never. He was really difficult when we did plays because I would have to say, now sit down, we're going to go over those lines. I would get somebody to cue him because his whole talent was ad-libbing.
Well, let's now, I want to follow with that, Jayne, for a second. And that is, here is a man who his whole talent is ad-libbing. His talent is working that audience. His talent is knowing that real people are funnier than, he's got lots of talents. Time goes by, and you just said about acting, and you've got Meeting of the Minds. Now, it's a whole departure from late night, but it still is in the book. You don't let it slide, Ben. You bring in the full life, even though it's not part of the late night experience. So here you've got a man going from literally creating the silly spontaneity of late night to one of the most acclaimed, serious productions in public television,
Oh, yeah.
Meeting of the Minds.
Yeah, we won, he won every award there is to win in America.
Oh, even Peabody's.
Oh yeah, I think 3 Peabodys.
Very rare for someone in
Yeah.
entertainment to win a Peabody.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, someday look at it again and see how many lines he had to learn. And he didn't learn them. He was the only one with a script in front of him. And if I was Catherine the Great, and he'd say, very interesting, Your Majesty. Now,
Oh, looking at the cue cards down there, the cheater.
or the cue cards up there.
Oh,
And the other actors learn to do it. I can't because I don't see well. And anyway, I can't act if I don't know the lines. I can't read off a teleprompter. But he never had more than, I don't know, 10 or something lines.
well, you know what? He didn't need to write lines. Can I share something that I discovered it only from the book, Ben and Jayne, and that was, you talk about lines. What's my line? Was that what the show that?
Oh, yeah.
What's my line? This actual phrase, is it bigger than a bread basket?
Bread box.
Bread
Bread box, is it bigger than a bread box? Now, that's a common term that we use. That's a Steve Allen ad lib. And he said it on that show, and it became a term that people just kept using over and over again.
And also, he could say things. Now, I don't think is it bigger than a bread box is funny, but something about the place he said it, the timing, and the way he says things. It was a scream. What's funny about is it bigger than a bread box?
Well, you know, what's so funny, I'll tell you. Well, I'm going to save this for a second, but what's so funny is his expressions about it, his deadpan look at that camera, and his ability to not take himself seriously.
That's right.
I think some of the biggest laughs and memorable moments was when he made the guffaw, when he was the butt of what was transpiring.
Yeah.
Well, that famous moment when he was, what was that, Big Bill Allen, the sportscaster, and that's probably the most requested clip from his primetime series. And he had, I'm just trying to recall exactly what happened, but he messed up a line, he started laughing, and then it was just, he was laughing because he was laughing, and then he saw his hair was kind of messed up, and he kept on laughing for about a good 2 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And I think in the meantime, he said that Jackie Leonard was out in the wings angry at him because he was supposed to come out and do a bit there, and he couldn't come out because they were still on Steve laughing and just not taking himself seriously. I think that was really quite a quality that he had.
Exactly, and also his laugh. That was a cackle. Steve didn't laugh the way the average person does. He would laugh, he would cackle. We did a show that was written purposely for that. It was the homicide, Life in the Streets. And they had a scene where he had to cackle. Well, everybody on the set, right away, they adored that scene.
Well, you know,
He was famous for his laugh.
I can talk to you both about Steve all this time, but our time is up, and I'm actually going to use that moment. That's how I was going to actually end the show, because in the book, Ben, you bring out this tribute to Steve Allen by Steve Martin after his death, and he says this: "There is nothing nowhere, not anything funnier, that Steve Allen on his show, sitting at his desk, laughing uncontrollably. That unplugged moment defines so simply his early sense of joy and embodies the soul of a kind of comedy that inspired many." And I want to thank you both for sharing that soul with us.
Well, we're
today.
honored, Barry. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
guys. And thank you for joining us. Now, before Ben and Jayne leave, I would like to leave you with these words from Steve Allen and the book Inventing Late Night. "No one remembers any joke for 20 years. What people remember are the little experiences that they live through. That's what I get them to do. Live with me through the little adventures I have on the show every night. If I've succeeded at all, that's the reason." I'm Barry Kibrick. Steve Allen did more than succeed. He invented late night because he and the viewers all lived through the little adventures and experiences that he knew lied between the very funny lines of all that he said. Thank you both so very much.
Nice.
Oh, thank you
my
for doing
pleasure.
this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like a tape of our show or would like to become a member of our book club and receive our weekly email show updates, just write us at barrykibrick@aol.com.